we can. And reporting in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution suggests that a number of local elected officials also believe that this is the way to win. Democratic State Senator Derek Mallow of Savannah called the bus tour monumental. Former State Representative Calvin Smear of Columbus called it a big deal. And Melissa Klink, a veteran liberal activist in the exurbs, declared herself overjoyed. Winning Georgia means understanding Georgia is much larger than just Atlanta, she said. It includes our rural areas as well as our larger cities outside the perimeter who are anxious for attention. Now, later this hour, Harris and Walz will make another campaign stop, and tomorrow they will continue their tour, tape their first sit-down interview, and Harris will hold a solo rally in Savannah. For his part, the Trump team is not discounting Georgia either. Trump wanted to win there so badly last time. Remember, he got indicted over his efforts to overturn the results of the state. And it still gets under his skin whenever he's in Georgia, it seems. There's only 70 days to go. We will soon see if the road to the White House in 2024 for the Harris-Walz team runs through Georgia. But this is all a big start for that. And that is where we start this hour with White House correspondent Mike Memoli out in Savannah, Georgia, following the Harris-Walz bus campaign and the bus. With me at the table here is writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, as well as MSNBC Justice and Legal Affairs analyst and veteran of many a Southern campaign, Anthony Nicolle. Okay, Mike, I want to start with you. We have limited time because we got to get back following that bus, whatever that means. Tell us about what's going on in Savannah at the moment, what they've done on the ground, what the reaction's been.
Well, Jen, we saw as soon as Vice President Harris stepped off Air Force Two, we see a bit of the coalition work that's underway here in southern Georgia. She and Governor Walz posed for a photo with students from Savannah State University, which is one of many historically black colleges and universities here in the state of Georgia. Now they're on their way into more rural parts of these counties around Savannah. And it really speaks to the strategy of a campaign that feels like it has some very real momentum. The kids would call this a flex. They have the resources and they have the ability with a more competitive race than maybe was the case with President Biden at the top of the ticket to play in the expanded battleground map. They're trying to not run up the score in places like Atlanta, as a typical Democratic campaign would do, but they want to make inroads into places where Donald Trump has the advantage. And call it the Raphael Warnock playbook. You also know we can relive our past lives from 2012. This is a bit of the Obama playbook as well. When I was on the road quite a bit with then Vice President Joe Biden, especially in a state like Ohio, they would send him to exactly these kinds of places. They were Romney, maybe 55, 60% counties where they wanted to maybe shave a percentage point, 2, 3, even 4 off his margins in those counties, and then have President Obama hit places like Columbus, like Cleveland, like Cincinnati, to drive turnout among the base. All of that adds up to maybe a narrow victory, but a victory. And Ohio was the state that put President Obama over the line to win re-election. So that's what we're seeing here, where President Biden and his campaign had sort of been really shrinking the map to focus on defense, playing in those blue wall states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. We see them making an intentional statement with this trip, coming out of the convention, a very successful convention in their view, to put the Trump campaign on notice that they're not just winning the states that they need to win the election, but to maybe expand that to have a big victory on November 5th.
It's definitely an interesting. It was reminding me of the Obama-Biden strategy, too, of showing up. I've been on many a bus tour in many parts of the country where people are surprised they're there. But that's part of it, and that's part of how many people win in these more red or purple states. I want to ask you, since I have you here, you broke a huge story yesterday. You had new reporting about kind of this plan for a super PAC or a PAC that is going to run a big program that is going to be important after the election to counter basically Republican legal challenges and the battles that Democrats expect are going to come. Tell us a little bit more about your reporting. When is it going to start? What is their overall strategy? What are they hoping to really accomplish with it?
Yeah, Jen, this is going to be before, during, and after the election. They call it the Democracy Defenders PAC. And this really speaks to the need. Yes, every campaign, the National Committee, they all have what they call voter protection operations within their campaigns. But this is going to be an entity that is singularly focused on just that issue, both supporting legal efforts on the part of campaigns and parties up and down the ballot to make sure that they're expanding voting access, to make sure they're confronting Republican efforts to maybe restrict access, to challenge the vote. but also to go on the messaging front. When they see Donald Trump and his Republican allies trying to sow disinformation, sow doubt about this election, they want to be able to confront that and counteract that. So when you talk to Democrats about what keeps them up at night, it's this fact. It's that when Donald Trump did go to court after the 2012 election, it was very much last-minute, disorganized, a bit chaotic, and unsuccessful in the end. But they are worried that the Trump team and his allies are much more prepared this go-around, not just to try to challenge the results after the election, but to make efforts to challenge voting rules, to challenge early votes that are being cast already. So this is being led by Jim Messina, who, of course, led the Obama campaign in 2012. We're also seeing Norm Eisen, who was part of the impeachment team, a well-known Democratic lawyer. A former ally of Stacey Abrams is involved as the chief legal advisor, and our friend T.J. Ducklow also as the chief strategist. So this is going to be a new effort that is going to work hand in hand with the campaigns, with the state parties. They think it's an important mission, and they have $10 million to start this effort, and will raise more over the course of the next few weeks and months.
Mike Memoli, we're going to let you go back to chasing the bus, being on the bus, hopefully, doing all the bus things that you do. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon. And I'm going to bring in the panel here that I'd already introduced. Let me start with you, Anthony, because you and I met when you were, I think, a regional desk for Southern states on the Kerry campaign. Look at that memory.
We have more white hair. I do right now.
That's right. But back then, Democrats were not winning Southern states.
Right.
That was a hard assignment you had back then. Things have shifted a bit. What would you say to people who are kind of new to following this and thinking, okay, is Georgia an easy state? Is North Carolina an easy state?
Right.
What is different about this region of the country in terms of competing there as a Democrat?
So here's what was so interesting to me, Jen, about this last report. We heard Mike use the term. He said it was a flex.
Yeah,
right, for Kamala Harris.
That.
I love that term, and he's absolutely right. Here's some facts. This is the first time in more than 30 years that a Democratic nominee has been to Savannah and surrounding areas. And the reason...
It's so surprising because it's Warnock's hometown.
It is. Yeah. It is. But that, gives credence to the fact that Democrats have not always played in rural areas, in these one-stoplight towns where faith and family and football, some people would put football in front of family, depending on the SEC playoff game, but where those things reign supreme. The reason that it is... competitive right now is because women, in particular black women like LaToya Brown, like Stacey Abrams, invested the time. They built out the infrastructure. And so that's how we got Warnock and Ossoff. The other thing that's important here is demographic changes. Amy Walters said today, and I think she's right, that the electorate could be upwards of 29% of African-American voters. Statewide, 60% of the voters are expected to come from Metro Atlanta, which has historically been Democratic. The other thing I will say here, finally, is that we were talking about this a little earlier, is the transformational impact of good public policy. I work for Ted Kennedy, who he would say all the time, smart policy makes for smart politics. And this infrastructure law, we heard the mayor talk about it, $3.1 billion going to rural farmers throughout Georgia, $10 billion overall, including roads, bridges. But I read one story today, Jen, because I'm a regional press guy. I went back, I want to hear what
AJC,
local...
still reading the AJC.
Savannah Morning News.
Okay,
which told us...
Wasn't the Savannah Morning News, Anthony?
So, historic African-American community, right? They get $30 million to prevent storm drain flooding. That may not sound like a big thing, but when you have generational wealth invested into your home and you're just trying to save your home where you can raise your family, stuff like that matters, and people are going to vote in their best interest. And that's what I think Georgia's in play. It's
such an interesting, because they're also talking a lot about rural health care, which is such an important issue on this tour. That seems to be part of the Harris-Walz messaging. Now, you, Amanda, have spent a lot of time talking about democracy, which is also front and center. There's a lot of issues front and center in this election. And Georgia is such an interesting state for a range of reasons, everything Anthony mentioned, but also it is a state where Donald Trump was indicted for trying to overturn the election, right? And you have a complicated Republican leadership structure there. You have a popular governor, Brian Kemp, who was not going to campaign with Trump, and now he's campaigning with Trump. You have the former lieutenant governor who spoke at the convention. How do you think for Georgia voters, where they need to get every single vote, These are important issues. How do they balance that with integrating in this democracy argument since they've all lived it?
Well, first, I think, number one, you have to give them credit for showing up, especially considering that blows my mind that a Democrat hasn't been to Savannah in 30 years.
I know. I didn't know that either.
Like, what?
Nominee. Right.
So that's interesting, number one. But yes, just showing up and being accessible to typically conservative voters who may be willing to give you a look this time, because you have to understand, if you're one of these Republicans in Georgia, which was ground zero for a lot of these election conspiracies, there really 3 states got hit hard with it: Georgia, Arizona, and Michigan. There's been a backlash. Like, Republicans are fed up with the nonsense on some level. If you look at somebody like Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, who spoke at the convention, he didn't speak at the convention because he loved all these progressive agenda items and for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He was there because he wanted to restore the guardrails of democracy, have integrity of elections, and get back to some sort of constitutional order. So I do think she does have a balancing beam to walk on this, but she's going to have more Republicans than ever who are willing to give her a listen.
Yeah, which is a pretty important and interesting piece. Let me ask you, Anthony, we were talking a little bit earlier in the last hour about this balance she's got to strike. I mean, a bus tour is great. It takes time, right? She's preparing for a debate. She's doing an interview tomorrow. If you're sitting in those campaign strategy meetings, how much time are you spending showing up in places? They did one in Pennsylvania, too, in rural Pennsylvania, in rural Georgia, versus interviews, versus debate prep. What's the breakdown of things? So
what I would do, I'm glad she's sitting down with Dana Bash, who is one of the smartest reporters in Washington. I also hope that they are sitting down with top anchors in other media markets in Georgia, right? I remember
local anchors.
Local anchors, yeah. I remember in 2004, you mentioned that, briefing John Edwards about before he went off and did regional TV interviews. That's quite frankly, I'm glad she's doing a national interview, but honestly, Jen, you got to reach voters. In the state. And so I hope they're doing a little bit of that as well.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, being on the bus is part of the prep. Like, talking to real people and always road testing those messages to see how they hear it, and they might give you a line that you use in a debate. I mean, the whole thing where Weird came from just kind of bubbled up organically, and, you know, because it captured the moment. It's what real people were saying. And so, you know, she can prep the policy on the bus. Going out there, shaking hands, having real conversations really gets you in the right mindset.
The other thing I would say quickly here is that she's authentic. She has brought joy back to a campaign. And people, we say this all the time, people may not always remember what you say or what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel.
This is what politics is about. I wanted to ask you both about, because it falls into all of this. You mentioned football, faith. I mean, part of the messaging that you're hearing from Democrats last week, and I'm sure if you're them, you're going to try to integrate into the interview tomorrow, is about patriotism and freedom and rights. I mean, Amanda, you worked for conservative Republican senators. What do you make of this sort of flipping of the script? And do you think it could work with independent voters, never Trumpers, others who are kind of not sure what they want to do?
I mean, I think it already has been working. If you look at the election results from the midterms all the way through now, and you see the people getting excited, you know, We've kind of been saying for a long time, the mantle is ready to be stolen on freedom. And it's like Kamala Harris, as soon as she got the nomination, she's like, yep, I'm going to take that football and I'm going to run with it into the end zone. It was really incredible to watch the DNC. You know, all the flags, all the appeals to patriotism, inclusivity, if I could say that word correctly. It was a stark contrast, sadly, from the RNC, where you saw signs about mass deportation. I mean, those really harsh messages, tough things coming out. And so the contrast was very clear.
I don't want to cut you off as you're making it important. I just want to tell people what they're watching. We're seeing some live footage of Vice President Harris and Governor Wallace in Hinesville, Georgia, at a high school. Oh, and a high school band playing. We love it.
Yeah.
We love to see it. Maybe we need some football players jumping in there, too. That would be great. So this is the kind of old school